2 weeks ago, we started by talking about, I can't remember what the thing was called, but different kinds of temperaments in the workplace. And we talked about C people and T people. C people were more collaborative, had stronger soft skills. The T people were a little bit more rigid, more rule-driven, more domineering, less communicative, and so forth, and how those different kinds of people and that different kinds of diversity fit into the workplace. By the way, all of you people who are either in target populations, diverse populations, females especially, there is one of the things we talked about in the previous program was a new staffing company called Recruiter.com, started by two people who picked up on the fact that so many tech companies, big tech companies, have realized that their staff, their workforce, looks pretty much the same. They all seem to be heavily Caucasian, they're heavily male, and they're within a rather narrow age group as well. And they realized that that kind of homogeneity is not good. It's not healthy for a company. The more diversity you have, the more diverse perspectives you have, the higher your profits are. And that has been proven. And also you avoid making the mistakes that some companies have made, very high profile mistakes, by not having a diversity of perspectives in your team. So you make mistakes in your iPhone, for example, because in your exercise app you don't include reproductive schedule. And so it's like, what? Well, if you had a female in your design team, that wouldn't have happened. Or the folks who sent the Chevy Nova to South America, not realizing that in Spanish that word means doesn't go. And so if they'd had a Spanish speaker on their team, they probably wouldn't have made that costly mistake. And there are lots of mistakes that happen just because people very often in our big companies today create a product from just one perspective. And so the more diversity, the better it is. And the Recruiter company, we're hoping to get one or both of those founders of that staffing company to come speak at Launchpad once we build up our attendance again. One of them just had a baby, so we're not sure how soon she'll be able to come. But the point is, you can go into Recruiter.com. They try to place females in tech companies, but also people of color, people with handicaps. I was ecstatic to see that they have that target population as one of the kinds of folks that they're trying to integrate into the tech world. So anyway, there is that. So this is part 2 of that, and I have to admit, this presentation is not going to be going as I had planned for it to go. The article that I read about the Recruiter people mentioned unconscious bias. So is it Dora? Is that your name?
Yep.
Okay. Dora was talking about overt major discrimination and then the small little nuanced discrimination that is harder to prove and it's a little bit harder to even recognize that it's happening. And one of the books that they recommended in that article was a thing called Blind Spot. And the subtitle is Hidden Biases of Good People. We all have biases, all of us. They stem from experience, they come from the biases of our parents and our peer group and our own experience. We all have biases. And enlightened people, I think, of all different kinds, but enlightened people recognize those as not necessarily applicable to an entire group of people. And when the biased thought enters their mind, they adjust it, they reflect on it, and they make it go away. But the automatic bias, the unconscious bias kind of, that it appears and then it's there. Difficult to acknowledge, but the book talks about that difference. So they talk about the unconscious bias, and then the how once you reflect on it, you adjust it, and you say, well, that obviously shouldn't necessarily apply to this person. And there have been, in the appendix of that book, there's a whole history of tests and experiments that they have done through the years, back during the McCarthy years, where they were trying to, they would put people in the, are you a communist, that bias. They talked about the horrible racial prejudice following World War I and all of that, backlashes of different kinds of things. And today, how unconscious biases about transgenders, about young people, old people, all the different groups that we may not like because they're so different from us. And they have come up, the two authors of this finally came up with a very interesting test. And I don't know that I'll ever give it to you, but if I'm going to give away 2 of these books as door prizes, and you can also go into it and probably find this test online. It's a curious test that does seem to be very accurate in helping you see, do you have a bias? And the way that they work it, there's a control test that you take where you see, I believe they start with insects and flowers and a bunch of adjectives. And so there'll be, some adjectives are good adjectives, fragrant, beautiful, I don't know, just adjectives, harmonious, happy, and then they have a list of insects, and then they have a list of flowers. And you are supposed to click as quickly as you can whether this word is a good word or not a good word. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it good? Is it bad? And what ends up as fast as you can, and your speed is a huge factor in this. How quickly do you associate insects with something good or insects with something bad? And the same with flowers. How quickly do you associate the good with the bad, and so forth. And then unless you are, an 8-year-old and you really love insects, you are probably gonna associate flowers good, insects bad, and that's going to be the affiliation. And then the next test that they give also has, you're supposed to take it twice, I think, and they have pictures of people of different races, and so just the faces, and then they have the good, the bad, the good, the bad. So. So you're thinking that, and sometimes they will say, we want the white people to be good and the black people to be bad, and then you take the test again, and it's the black people to be good and the white people to be bad. But what happens, the reason that they feel that it registers your unconscious bias, is that almost all people, and including sometimes the minorities, will have an unconscious bias favorably toward white people and unfavorably toward black people. And the 2 people that created the test, their whole world is diversity and acceptance of diverse populations. And they both work with different races, and they felt that they were not biased in any way. And it was a huge shock to discover that what happens is they're slower on the one where they're fast on white good, white good, white good. Those things are equal, and they were slower on the black good when they got to that. And it's because their mind is making the adjustment. Their immediate thought was the negative, and then they have to fix it. They have to adjust it. And they took the test over and over and over, and it was consistent, and they were stunned. It was an enormous surprise, and they do this same test procedure with lots of different things, with gays, with men and women, which ones are affiliated, and then there's different adjectives. So it's like do you associate women with laundry or with briefcase? Well, guess which one. So there's that sort of thing, and they test your mental, immediate, subconscious associations. Is your association with this one good or bad? So it's a very interesting book to read just from the scientific implications of the whole thing. So at any rate, discrimination in the job search. So we're going to talk a little bit about specifically how you may be discriminated against in the job search. But that's what it's all based on. So it's fascinating to read the whole thing. Obviously, we have EEOC laws that protect us supposedly against discrimination in the 6 big categories of religion, age, gender, national origin, race, and disability. We have not yet become enlightened enough to include sexual orientation as one of the official EEOC things. It was interesting, I saw a list of the counterpart to this list in the UK, and they have also added pregnancy and transgender are on their list. Pregnancy, sometimes you can claim discrimination against somebody for being pregnant as a gender discrimination, sometimes as a disability, sometimes you can get that in there. But at any rate, those are the big 6. But then there is this unconscious bias, and the unconscious bias happens with all sorts of different things. And I wanted to read a piece to you from this book. There was the guy, this actually came off from online. This guy said, earlier in my career, I was preparing for a national championship in canoe marathon. I arrived at the office by 6 a.m. so I could put in a full day's work before heading to canoe practice in the late afternoon. A sleek 18-foot, 6-inch racing boat sat atop my relatively new white van in the company parking lot. An executive phoned me one day and asked me to relocate my vehicle. He says that needs to be out of sight. A van is not a suitable vehicle for someone in your role, and having play toys on the top says that we're not serious about our work. Want to work for that company? The underlying message was you need to check this aspect of your life, your athletics, at the door. It is not welcomed here. Daily, we engage in prejudiced thinking without even realizing it. And so then it gives all kinds of things about what constitutes prejudice, and a big chunk of it is, do you feel comfortable with this person? Well, they've proven with study after study after study that we tend to feel more comfortable with people who look like us. That's one of the reasons that we tend to hire people who look like us. We tend to eat lunch with people who look like us. You rarely see best friends in the workplace, somebody who's in their 60s be best friends and hang around and socialize with somebody who's in their 20s. We're like a different species. We tend to associate and hang with and hire and work with people who look like us. So you ask yourself, do I feel comfortable with this person or not? Because I'm skeptical about this person's ability to do a good job. Because I would be hesitant to put this employee in front of a customer. Because I would prefer not to have this individual on my project team. Because are there work-related reasons for this? Or are there not? Is it because of your background, your upbringing, your conscious or unconscious bias? So all of those things are important. Think about it specifically. Are your answers based on work performance, or are you simply uncomfortable because this person is so different? Because of the way they dress, because they have piercings or tattoos, their sexual orientation, does that make you uncomfortable? Their age, they're so different, their mannerisms, how they act, their lifestyle, do they have a boat on top of their van? What irritates you about this person? What makes you uncomfortable about this person? And so anyway, biases, they sneak up on us even when you think you're good in that category. You never know. As you saw, the diversity of people, actually, in certain ways, we were not very diverse. We didn't have any racial diversity. We had our Middle Eastern person, that was a country of origin diverse person, and you're from another country, right? So we had that slight bit of national origin diversity, but as a group, we're somewhat homogeneous here. So did you have any preconceived notions about would this person have a hard time getting hired or not? Would I want to work with this person? Was I impressed with the presentation of this person? Do I think that this person has skills that make them marketable, or do they have characteristics that would make them not marketable? The blind spot, I just thought I'd point that out to you in case any of you want to check it out or get it from the library or something. And if you want to check out the test, you could probably pull it up online and take the test and see yourself if you have an unconscious bias, and you can make it be about any topic, I think, but the one that was most readily available was the insect flower one as the base, and then the racial one. Implicit association test is what it's called. So cultural fit. Does it matter? Does it matter that you're different? Ask yourself that. If you joined a company where everybody was in a different age group, if everybody was in a different racial group, if you were a minority for whatever reason, would you be uncomfortable in a company like that? If a company says, we're not going to hire you because we just feel that there's not a good fit with our particular corporate culture, would you think, yeah, that's right, I wouldn't be comfortable here? Or would you revolt against that because you feel that a diverse environment is the way to go? Does it matter? Or do you think it's just another way that people try to discriminate against you because you make them uncomfortable? What do you guys think? Is cultural fit something that you should think about or not?
Culture can apply to a lot of things. For example, I'm a woman that works in software engineering as a QA, and I don't feel that my culture is doing fantasy football or the boss doesn't invite me to lunch with the other guys. You know what I mean? That's kind of I don't know if other women feel the same way, but it's a way of excluding a woman. If you don't talk about football, in that kind of environment, everybody's crazy about football, I don't think you're going to fit well with your group. Just a little example, but there's other nuances.
Okay. So just to get that on our video, so she said she falls in two perhaps minority areas. She is a woman. She is Latina, correct? And that she would not. She thinks it is important that you have other people at least that are like you. She wouldn't feel comfortable perhaps going to lunch with everybody else was a male and they were all talking about football and there was nobody that shared her interests or whatever. She would feel out of place. Have any of you women that are here, have any of you ever been in a department or a workplace where you were the only woman? You have?
I've worked in places where I was one of two women, and it seems like there's a good old boy thing going on there, and it feels, like there's camaraderie, and that you don't quite fit in, but at the same time, I look at it as a way to diversify it. If I don't break into that too, then how is it going to open up for other people, other women or whatever?
And what was the workplace where you were one of two women? A photo lab. Everybody else was guys.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there was the good old boy kind of thing you didn't exactly feel quite in. Okay.
Well, the last place that I worked, I didn't feel connected to anybody, and I wouldn't have thought that would be a problem because of the kind of work I do, which is security, information security. But it was, by the time I left, 8 months after I started, I was glad to leave.
And was that the reason that you were glad to leave? Okay. So again, to get it on the video, so she's in computer security, and she just left a job where she was a consultant, right? Traveling.
I traveled a lot.
So she traveled to different companies doing work with their computer infrastructure, their computer security, and always felt isolated by that. So that was one big component of, are you happy in this job? One of the nice things about the Recruit Her staffing company is they say before they place somebody in a position, they vet that company, and they look to see what is the work-life balance at this company. How many women or whatever do you already have working at this company? What is your policy about family leave? What is your promotion history and that sort of thing? And so they vet it to make sure they're not going to put one of their people in a company if they don't feel that it is going to be a welcoming, accepting, positive experience. And I kind of like that. So the men-women thing and even the racial thing, it should be pretty easy to make a balance of that. Now, somebody with a major disability, they're probably used to being like the only one of their type in a company where everybody else is pretty much able-bodied. Sometimes you put somebody with a huge disability in a company, they are unique as far as that characteristic, and might feel excluded because of the accommodation that needs to happen to them. But at any rate, so. Would you guess that it? Would you say as a group that you do feel it matters? And it's a way to discriminate against you. I don't know. Have you ever been in a situation where you were one of the only man or one of very few men? Of course, David. He's been a teacher, right?
Well, not only that, but when I never finished, and I think looking back on it, it was probably one of the reasons why I never finished my master's in speech and language pathology. I was a single only male in the graduate program, and perhaps that had more to do with my own, I don't know, I mean, I just wanted, I guess, a more balanced environment, but it's interesting that you should be talking about all of this, because when I started working as a teacher in the 80s, as a gay man, I felt like I had to completely separate my personal life from my work life.
And you did, because you would have been fired.
I did. I mean, I could have gotten fired. I mean, there was this whole thing about moral ineptitude, or whatever you call in the contract. And that back then, you know, it was illegal, you know, in Texas. They had sodomy laws on the books. So I had to, you know, in El Paso and in Dallas, I always felt like I was always having to watch my P's and my Q's. And I never really have gotten over that. And I think that's why it's just easier for me to be a temp worker or a substitute teacher, or, you know, of course it's not a very good career, you know, path to take, but I kind of feel like if I'm to stay on the periphery, nobody can hurt me. So.
Not to minimize what anyone has said, but sometimes it's not about the candidate's background. So, for example, I used to do HR for a department where almost all of our hiring was done by committee. And so we had these guiding documents for our department. So it's like, this is what we believe, and this is what we promote. And if you don't believe and you don't promote that, then this is not going to be a good fit for you. But there were other times where people at one point were like, you cannot exclude a candidate by just using the words, I don't think they would fit here. We would probe. What do you mean by fit? What exactly are you talking about? It's like fit was not allowed, the word that wasn't allowed. You had to point to a specific thing that the candidate said that you think would mean that they wouldn't fit. So that's a different example too.
That's a very good point. And if somebody says, I think that it wouldn't be a good fit for you, then don't just say, oh, okay, thank you, and walk away. Ask for clarification. In what way do you feel I wouldn't be a good fit here? and then see if they don't give you a little bit more information. Just like if they say that you're overqualified. I've been told that, and then I would always say, really, I feel as though I've got everything you're looking for. In what way do you feel I wouldn't be qualified? And then sometimes they'll say, well, the salary is quite a bit less. Okay, I get it. Or, the manager in this department is, she's just 28, and I don't know that she might be intimidated by you. And then I would say, well, the last job I had, my manager was 25 and we got along great. Could I meet the manager? Could we see if I'm scary, if I'm intimidating? I mean, look how short I am. How could I be intimidating? So, sometimes just having some humor or getting to the crux of the problem. For what reason? What are we really talking about here? What is it that you feel makes you uncomfortable about my qualifications or me or whatever, and see if you can do it.
I think the change that I've worked in academia, of course, the hiring committees, and we had matrix too, to where it was based on what was added in the resume or what is the interview in certain words, and I think that does help a lot with not discriminating against in the hiring process. But sitting in front of a hiring committee is so intimidating too. So
now, how many of you have worked in a place where the culture really was different? For example, there's a right now, I guess you would call it an expanding company. It's called Spare Foot. 2 or 3 years ago, consistently it's named as one of the best companies to work for in Austin. And maybe 3 years ago, the two men that started Spare Foot were both listed in the Forbes 40 under 40 to watch. So that was pretty neat deal. They were in their 20s, I think, when they started that company. But on their benefit list, when they say, these are the things that we give you, one of the benefits that they advertise is refrigerators full of beer, all the beer you want. For young people, that's like, wow, yeah, okay, I've arrived. But older people, perhaps that's not quite the draw. Another thing they say that is a benefit is that they celebrate new hires by going to some bar on 6th Street, and there's some kind of a well-known celebratory shot that they share. And again, that might not be the benefit that you were hoping for. But in addition to that, another thing that they advertise is full medical benefits paid by the company for the employee and everybody in their family. That one is so good, it's like they don't realize it, that's so good. Forget the shot, I want that one. But it tells you a little bit about the culture. And I know Jim he worked briefly at GSD&M, which is kind of a creative, youthful culture. And they have a bar. They have a bar on site, on premises. They audition bands all the time, so they have this little stage with a sound system and everything. And they had a cooler full of wine, if I remember, in his SharePoint little developing department. But the culture was perhaps very different to what he would really. I don't know. Maybe you were all into that. I kind of thought you were, a Coca-Cola guy or something. But it was a very different culture. I mean, he's a family man. He's got kids, and he goes home and doesn't. That whole party thing might be a cultural thing that you're not interested in. Have any of you worked in a culture that was very different in terms of that, a lifestyle culture? Chris?
Not only was I the only woman in the department, I was the only woman who was in her 30s working with a bunch of guys in their 20s. And the culture was very much, let's go out and drink until we fall down.
And how many times did you participate in that?
Once or twice, and I ended up getting married because of it.
Okay, moving on. So maybe try it, yeah. We've seen that happen every once in a while in We gotta go. We've seen that happen every once in a while in an interview, where one of the interview questions will be something like, "Listen, every other Friday we like to go down to this bar down here and share happy hour. You know, kind of a way to get to know your coworkers. You in on that?" What would you say? Absolutely, sign me up. Or I'm hanging out there all the time. You know, they know me down there. Maybe that wouldn't be so good. But if you know, is that an indication that maybe you wouldn't be happy with this particular thing? I don't know. Lifestyle, is it a way to discriminate, or is it really, is it a real thing that cultural fit is important and it doesn't really matter the rest of it, whether you would fit or whether you wouldn't fit? I do know that, of course, when you're young, you have you can't even imagine being old or working with old people or appreciating old people. And I remember one time coming to a conference, and the keynote speaker, she's in her 80s, I think. And I thought, oh, yawn, this is going to be terrible. Why is she even still working? And I really, the lowest possible expectations about how I could use that presentation ever. And I'm telling you, she bounded up on that stage, and she was the most high energy, upbeat, positive. She was a crackerjack. I would have worked in any company where she was. I wanted to work with her. I wanted to work for her. I wanted to learn from her. And it was just, it didn't matter. She would have fit in any culture. She would have done the happy hour thing, I think. She came up with great ideas. She was motivational. She was fabulous. And it was my own, not very unconscious bias against, what could I possibly learn from that person? She should be home knitting. And she was great. And 9 times out of 10, when you have a bias, conscious or unconscious, the way to defeat it is to just meet somebody in that group. Get to know them in that group. And then you have a face, you have a person, you have a life, you've got a friend that you can attach with somebody. So how do you activate change? How do you beat your biases? Make it a point not to hang with the same people each time. Make it a point to sit by somebody who's really different from you. Eat lunch with them. One of the things that happens often in the workplace is that when somebody's different, nobody hangs with them, and they're isolated, and they immediately look for other places to go because they don't feel as though they belong. Well, put a stop to that. Make it a point to always interact with people that are different, and if you hear any jokes or anything like that, any comments about they're all like that. We don't like people from the Middle East, they're all this, they're all that, they're all the welfare recipients, they're all this, they're all that. We're hearing so much of that now with the presidential election of putting everybody in a category, in a little negative box and assigning characteristics to them. And so you have an opportunity to put a stop to that if you ever hear any of that going on, or speak out with your vote if that's the way it is. Learn more about the background and the history and the culture of other people, and go check out movies and books and music and art that is something that you hadn't ever experienced before. But make it a point to see things from their perspective. It doesn't mean that you have to become them, but understand them, learn more about them. We have a wonderful opportunity now that different countries are opening up to us to learn more about that history, what's going on there. Yes, sir.
So Trump is very open about discrimination, so why won't somebody take him to court? I mean, he's against the U.S. laws.
So the question was, Trump is very open about his discrimination. Why doesn't somebody take him to court? Because he has freedom of speech. And as long as he doesn't advocate violence against those people, he did say you could beat that guy up and I'll pay your court fees. He did say that. But he can say those things. Now, if he practices those things in his businesses, if he discriminates against people in his businesses in those ways, then yeah, then you have a chance to take him to court.
Someone can say something, bad.
If he incites violence against a group,
Someone can say something degrading about women or about
yes,
Afro-American, and it's okay, as long as
Yes.
it's just saying it.
freedom of speech.
Not in the workplace.
You don't have to like it.
Not in the workplace.
Oh, of course, that is true. In public, yes, not in the workplace, because then it's sexual harassment. And so there is a law in the workplace that discriminates, that prevents that, or there is punishment for that. But yeah, freedom of speech, you don't have to like it. Walk away. David?
Would like to comment, you know, if we only protected popular or polite speech, then we would never need to have that doctrine, that amendment to the Constitution protecting our ability to speak our minds. And no matter how ugly something may be, we still have we still have the freedom, at least in the public square, to air our points of view, no matter how ugly they are. And of course, you can come back at them.
Speaking up.
Right.
Don't let it just hang there and make it seem as though by your silence that you approve of it. Speak up. Speak up. Document things. If you hear things in the workplace, document it, write it down, journal. Learn more about your own ideas, your own prejudices. But it's dicey. But I encourage you to, if you see any kind of prejudice in the workplace, if you are in a position where you are hiring people, promoting people, keep in mind, identify your own prejudices and make sure that you fight against them at all times. Reflect and adjust and make them go away.